Can you hear me? First reading is from Daniel 12, verses 1 to 3. At that time, Michael, the great prince, the protector of your people, shall arise. There shall be a time of anguish such has never occurred since nations first came into existence. But at that time, your people shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book. Many of those people who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, to some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the skies, and those who lead the many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. And the second reading is from Mark chapter 13, verses 1 to 8. As he came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings." Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be, and what will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" Then Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places, and there will be famines, but this is the beginning of the birth pangs." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Our next hymn, thanks Andrea, is "How Shall I Sing to God When..." It's called "How Shall I Sing to God." We've sung this before, but I invite you to stand and sing it together with me. To God when life is filled with hopes, loving and blue, wonder what I'll sing from the heart, thankfully receiving, joyfully believing. This is my song, I'll sing it forever. How shall I sing to God when life is filled with bleak trials, empty and true, breaking my way? I'll sing through my day, angrily or breaking, crying or complaining. This is my song, I'll sing it with love. How shall I sing to God and tell my Saviour's story? Passover bread, life from the dead, I'll sing with my heart, witnessing and giving, risking and forgiving. This is my song, I'll sing it with heart. Thank you. Okay. Got a story. Story. Come on up. This one is called "Giraffes Can't Dance." Gerald was a tall giraffe whose neck was long and slim, but his knees were awfully bandy and his legs were rather thin. He was very good at standing still and munching shoots off trees, but when he tried to run around, he buckled at the knees. Now, every year in Africa, they hold the jungle dance, where every single animal turns up to skip and prance. And this year, when the day arrived, poor Gerald felt so sad, because when it came to dancing, he was really very bad. The warthogs started waltzing, and the rhinos rock and rolled. The lions danced a tango, which was elegant and bold. The chimps all did a cha-cha with a very Latin feel, and 8 baboons then teamed up for a splendid Scottish reel, which I'm sure Rob would appreciate. Gerald swallowed bravely as he walked towards the floor, but the lions saw him coming and they soon began to roar. "Hey, look at clumsy Gerald," the animals all laughed. "Giraffes can't dance, you silly fool." "Oh, Gerald, don't be daft." Gerald simply froze up. He was rooted to the spot. "They're right," he thought. "I'm useless. Oh, I feel like such a clot." So he crept off from the dance floor and he started walking home. He'd never felt so sad before, so sad and so alone. Then he found a little clearing and he looked up at the sky. "The moon can be so beautiful," he whispered with a sigh. "Excuse me," coughed a cricket who'd seen Gerald earlier on. "But sometimes when you're different, you just need a different song." Listen to the swaying grass and listen to the trees. To me, the sweetest music is those branches in the breeze. So imagine that lovely moon is playing just for you. Everything makes music if you really want it to. With that, the cricket smiled and picked up his violin. Then Gerald felt his body do the most amazing thing. His hooves had started shuffling, making circles on the ground. His neck was gently swaying and his tail was swishing round. He threw his arms out sideways and he swung them everywhere. Then he did a backward somersault and leapt up in the air. Gerald felt so wonderful. His mouth was open wide. "I am dancing. Yes, I'm dancing. I am dancing," Gerald cried. Then one by one each animal who'd been there at the dance arrived while Gerald boogied on and watched him quite entranced. He's doing Saturday Night Fever in there, I'm sure, at one point. They shouted, "It's a miracle. He must be in a dream. Gerald's the best dancer that we've ever seen." "How is it that you dance like that? Please, Gerald, tell us how." But Gerald simply twizzed around and finished with a bow. Then he raised his head and looked up at the moon and stars above. "We all can dance," he said, "when we find music that we love." Go. Happens. Have a lot of pictures, and good pictures. That's fun. And I've got some colouring of a giraffe dancing. There you go. You're there, all right. Our readings from the Bible are about things that are impossible too, in a different way. And I want to focus on the reading from the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark describes the scene with Jesus standing in the temple courtyard with his disciples. Now, the courtyard, that was it. The courtyard of the temple, before the temple was destroyed, this was the second temple, was the heart and focus of Jewish worship, was the place you went to meet with God. It was the holy place. And there was a bit of dissension about whether it should be, or whether, God is focused in one place or it's in the Jewish people and their faith. But that was a sacred place. That's why Jews went there every year. Because, like the Hajj, really, it was something that you did. You would return to the core of your faith. And it was apparently an amazing place. Someone's tried to reproduce it to scale, and all I see those little dots in the middle. Those little dots are supposed to be people. Now, of course, the disciples were there looking at this wonderful scene, and they asked Jesus to take notice. Hey, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings? How long have they been with him up to this point, do you think? And how much do you think he was really impressed? Or that they should know maybe that he might not be impressed by big stones and big buildings. According to the first century historian Josephus, the Jerusalem temple of Jesus' day was an awe-inspiring wonder. It had been newly constructed by Herod the Great, and the temple's retaining walls were composed of stones 40 feet long. The temple itself occupied a platform twice as large as the Roman Forum and 4 times as large as the Athenian Acropolis. That's to give scale of the day. Herod reportedly used so much gold to cover the outside walls that anyone who gazed at them in bright sunlight was blinded. Now, Jesus isn't impressed. Instead, he responds to the disciples' remark with a question. Do you see these great buildings? Which is sort of a funny question, seeing they've just pointed them out to him. The dialogue doesn't exactly flow evenly there. What the disciple sees actually is a very impressive piece of architecture and something that makes him think about how big and powerful God is. For the disciple, those massive stones hold religious memory. They're a sign and symbol of spiritual glory, pride and worthiness and holiness. What impresses the disciple is this sense of you've got something physical that gives a sense of religious certainty and permanence amongst those glittering stones. But when Jesus looks at them, he sees scattered stones and ruins, rubble and destruction. He sees fragility, not permanence. Not one stone will be left here, one upon another, Jesus tells the stunned disciples. All will be thrown down. And having been there many years ago, you sort of struggle to get a scale of the stone. They are some of the stones of the old temple. And you see there's a person in the background there, but those are literally, some of them are literally probably a quarter the size of this building, of this room. They are massive stones. So when Jesus is saying, you look at these stones, these massive stones, not one of these massive stones will be on another. And what impressed me when I saw the ruins, when you see the ruins, that's the bits and pieces that are left, is that how much of a task it must have been for the Romans to actually pull the thing down. It's no mean feat, but they did. Not many years after Jesus' death. Jesus is sort of here predicting the future, but that's not the deeper truth that this story tells us. The truth that Jesus unveils is that God won't be contained by stones and gold, no matter how magnificent. In this sense, what Jesus offers his disciples is an apocalyptic vision. He invites them to look beyond the grandeur of the temple and recognise that God won't be domesticated. God goes beyond every building, every religion, every mission statement, every strategic plan, and every symbol human beings create in God's name. That's an easy sentence to say, but I think it's important to take it in, because that's actually what Jesus was saying. You build up all this stuff that's supposed to be talking about God, but in the end, it's all just stones and wood and gold, and that's not what really matters. The story, I guess, invites us to put ourselves in the disciples' place and ask ourselves, am I willing to sit with the fact that things can fall apart? Can I embrace a journey of faith that includes rubble, ruin, and failure? What happened then? That's an artist impression of not someone who'd been there, obviously, because that was during the Renaissance, but the destruction of the temple in those days. I guess that's a more modern rendering of the apocalypse. In the second part of the story, gospel story, Jesus teaches his disciples what to do and how to live when the walls start crumbling down. And rather than seeing ourselves as having all the answers, Jesus insists that the response to all this stuff should be calm strength and generous love in the face of the apocalypse. Don't be alarmed, he says, when truth is shaken and nations make war and impostors preach alluring gospels of fear, resentment, and hatred. Don't give in to terror. Don't despair. Don't capitalise on chaos. God is not where people often say God is. God doesn't fearmonger. So as the apocalypse, the unveiling takes place, make peace. Choose hope. Cultivate patience and live out love as the world reels and changes. For me, this is the great challenge of the gospel, not to simply bear the apocalypse, but to bear it with the radical love Jesus models for us. The American record producer Quincy Jones, who I didn't know about except I saw him in a documentary a little while ago, he died this year, not long ago. And many of the obituaries quoted him as, this is the quote that came up when you did a search for him: every day you have to make a choice between love and fear. As much as you can, choose love. That felt like a Jesus statement to me. And it's certainly what I think Jesus is saying in response to, that the disciples should be doing in response to the sort of things that are happening in the world around them, because they were living in a world that was apocalyptic to them and was going to get worse. And Jesus said, it's going to get worse. But in those days, these stones will mean nothing. What will mean what you are called to do is to continue to live in love. Living with uncertainty was hard for the first century followers of Jesus, and it's just as hard for his 21st century disciples as well. The promise God offers us is not that if we just work hard enough, are religious enough, or make ourselves acceptable enough, or achieve enough, that we'll somehow leave all our uncertainties and insecurities behind. The Christian faith doesn't, or I guess shouldn't, offer an end to uncertainty or insecurity at all. Instead, it promises that we can discover who we are, who we really are, only in relationship to God, to the divine Spirit, as we receive our identity as beloved children of the God who created and sustains all things and loves us unconditionally. The antidote to uncertainty, Jesus implies, isn't certainty, but courage. And the best response to insecurity is the confidence that comes from knowing that God esteems you worthy of dignity, honour, and love. In the troubling context that we live in, it's easy to despair or grow numb or seek a different sort of security. But it's precisely now, when the world around us feels the most challenging, that we are called to respond with resilient, healing love. It's precisely now that we have to hold each other tight and allow the veil to part and the walls to fall. It's a lovely thing that at the end of this reading we have today, what Jesus is offering is not death, but birth. It's what Jesus says as you see all this destruction and horrible stuff. It's birth pangs, actually. It's the birth of something wonderful coming into being, something new, something of God. Something is struggling to be born, and God is our midwife. And what God births will never lead to desolation, but only to love. The important thing here is to be there, to share the vision, to keep the light of love burning, to try to face the trial without despair. So don't be afraid. Don't be deceived by reckless lies and false promises. Instead, listen to God's voice of hope. There's a poem, a very little poem by Irish poet Seamus Heaney, who in this little poem writes, "History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme." That is the vision, that is the birthing that Jesus is talking about in this reading today. So I'll leave you with that quote from Quincy Jones, actually. Every day you have to make a choice between love and fear. As much as you can, choose life. Amen.